This video provides a general overview of my sole proprietorship registered in Japan under the trade name Yosuke Adachi, PhD. This overview will include some of my life history leading up to the inception of the sole proprietorship. This general overview is expected to provide useful information as a background for describing my food waste solution project, RFLAD, which I am developing within the legal framework of my sole proprietorship. I started operating this sole proprietorship in 2014. This was soon after I quit my job at the University of Tokyo, where I had been working briefly as a postdoc. As a continuation of my work in glaciology, which is the field in which I got my doctorate. I actually had an earlier postdoctoral appointment in Germany at the United Nations University, where I tried to work at the interface of the physical and social sciences. And I wanted to continue working in that direction as opposed to entirely within the physical sciences. But that didn't quite happen. I essentially went back to working in an entirely physical science setting at the University of Tokyo. That wasn't quite what I wanted to do, so I quit after a couple of months. And I was trying to find my next job essentially when I stumbled upon the idea of doing freelance translation work. And because this was freelance work, I had to establish my legal status as a sole proprietor. And so that's how my sole proprietorship began in early 2014. I had to decide on a trade name, and I didn't think too hard because this sole proprietorship essentially wasn't something I had been longing to do, but it was just a requirement for tax purposes to earn money as a freelance linguist at the time. So I thought what makes me unique, and at the time my distinctive strength I thought was my PhD, which I earned from a premier US institution. And so I associated with my sole proprietorship with that accomplishment through my trade name. And so in sum, the initial motive for operating a sole proprietorship was to essentially ascertain how I could provide value to the economy around me through the competencies, skills, and experience I gained through my doctoral training. But then fast forward almost a decade, and this is how I view the work I'm doing. In retrospect, the purpose of this sole proprietorship is to identify through trial and error the right business, operation, or project that optimizes the use of my competencies in relation to the opportunities out there to contribute to tackling climate change. And so let me add a bit more context to this. I had a pretty tumultuous upbringing. I moved around a lot in my childhood, and this pie chart shows what I call my hybrid cultural makeup. I consider my cultural identity to be roughly proportional to the number of years I spent in the 5 countries I spent until I turned 30. The 5 countries are Japan, the US, the UK, France, and Germany. And so, for example, in Japan, I lived 12 years in total. And so 12 over 30 times 100 is about 40%. These percentages are approximate, and they're supposed to present a rough idea of my cultural identity. And relating to this is a notion of how I relate to my external environment. This figure shows a matrix that has countries in which I lived, or the economy in which I lived on the vertical axis, and then generic sectors within a typical society on the horizontal axis. The purple ovals are supposed to indicate the country-specific sectors that I proved to have affinities with. This is related to which sector I most closely formed ties with when I lived in those respective countries. So for example, in the US, I was there mostly in graduate school and also a year as an undergrad. And so when I was in the US, I associated a lot with academia and also developed affinities with the not-for-profit sector. That's nonprofits, and especially those that are impact-oriented. That's why I have two ovals over academia and the impact alternative sectors for the US. And then for Japan, I lived there in my teens, and so I tended to form ties with local businesses, consumer-facing businesses, and so I saw what consumers are like and what small businesses are like. And I should also mention that I think I have a tie with consumer cooperatives in Japan. I worked as a home delivery specialist for a consumer cooperative in the recent past as well. And then for the UK, I lived there in my childhood. For me, during that time through the education at the school I went to, I learned a lot about some fundamental things in life, like morals, religion, how to relate with people, ethics, and other important things that form the foundations of how an individual identifies their place or role in this world. And such philosophical matters, I think, are often embodied in the values upheld by the organizations in that economy, in the public sector of that economy. And so that's why I think I have an affinity with the British government. This shows an overall structure for my work in general. And it's essentially the structure of my tax returns. And what I have in the upper right with the colored backgrounds is the work related to my in-house development work, grouped under the project name RFLAD. And then outside of that area, but within the yellow rectangle, is the freelance work I do, such as for my translation work. And so the freelance work and the RFLAD work together compose my sole proprietorship work. And then outside the yellow rectangle is the salary-related revenue I get from activities such as interpretation work through a staffing agency,